different that we are going. So, this is our next edition in the plan review series, and we're going to take a look at our lighting. So, that's going to include our interior, exterior lighting, and the COMchecks that are there to help us with really providing us with information that's incredibly helpful. And I'm going to try to get the handout into the chat for everyone. I cannot promise that it's going to work, but we will see if it does. And so, unfortunately, it does not appear that it's going to work. So we are just going to go ahead and move on, and maybe I can get it out to everyone later here. All righty. So, a lot of times there's a little bit of a maybe conversation that happens when we start talking about electrical as it pertains to the energy code, as it pertains to the electrical code. Now, the things that we have to remember is that the NEC is there to really, deal with things like, how are we installing these electrical components, whether it's wiring or switches or, whatever the case may be. It's dealing with the installation, the wiring, the sizing, what are we doing with panels? What goes where within the panel itself? So it's dealing with like the flow of energy, right? Well, I don't want to say energy, the flow of electricity and all of that. And then we have to think about how the energy code really works with it. And what it's doing is really trying to focus on things like, how much lighting are you going to use within a project? Let's control that lighting. And just a few other energy conservation items. So there really is a delineation between the two, but yet they still work together, because obviously if you don't have wiring and the correct installation in there, you don't have lighting that's going to happen. So then you don't have to worry about how much lighting you put into a project. So something that, the state, made sure to keep in this go around was section C103.2, my absolute favorite section in the whole entire code book. And it's here to really provide us with a really good guidance as far as, items that absolutely have to be placed on the construction plans to ensure that we're really getting everything that we need so that we're able to do a plan review. Whether you're an architect, an engineer, or a plans examiner, this should really be your very first stop in there. And when we start talking about, the lighting components in here, 8, 11, and 12 are really the big ones that, we would want to focus on. We want to know the types of controls that are being installed with the system or the equipment, right? We also need that lighting fixture schedule that's also going to give us, the wattage and whatever controls that we have. And we'll talk about how some of that is displayed. And then our daylight zones. So, I always talk about, for the architects that, you design a building with all of these windows, and, rightfully so. Windows are not a bad thing, although, heat management is always fun with that. But every time you have a window, it creates a daylight zone. So whether or not that daylight zone now has to have controls involved with it is, a different story. But every single time you place a window in a structure, it creates the idea of that daylight zone. So all of the daylight zones have to be placed on the floor plans themselves. Now, let's talk about how much lighting we are allowed to put into our project. So the really good thing is the code gives you two options as to how you want to get there. You have the choice of utilizing the building area method, or you can go with the space by space method. And we'll dive into that a little bit further on that. But the decision as to which one you choose is kind of dependent on a few key factors. One, I would say, is, what type of occupancy you're going to have. Does it make sense to go through all of the math, for one over the other? But me as a plans examiner, it's incredibly important to know this, because this really does play a big impact on whether I get to utilize my math skills a lot more than maybe I would with another option. So 405.3.2 is the section that governs for the interior lighting. And like I said, it says you have to do one of the two. Now, it also incorporates kind of that concept of a core and shell, or that you're, bringing it to a certain point, but basically you're going to have spaces that are unfinished because you're going to have tenants come in or whatever the case may be. The code tells you how you're going to deal with it. And it says what you're going to do for those unfinished spaces is you're going to use the criteria that you find in the space by space method. All right. Well, here we go. We're diving into the building area method. So basically what you're going to do is you're going to go into the table. And that is our table. Oh, shoot. My brain just went. What was the table? 405.3.2, I want to say. But you're going to go into the table. You're going to find the building type that best represents what your building is. So if you were a building that's a bunch of offices, you're going to find the category of office. Then what it does is you take the amount of floor area and you multiply it by your lighting power density number. So if you were an office, and I don't know what the office number is, let's say you were allowed 0.56 watts per square foot, and it was 1,000 square feet. That would mean that you had 56 watts that you were allowed to utilize in that space. And I might be wrong. It might be 560. Hope is trying to do math really quickly, and that is not her strong suit. So that's basically how you would do this for it. Now, just because you're utilizing the building area method doesn't mean that you only are going to use one category out of the table. Maybe you have 2 stories, right? The bottom floor is office, the upper story is a restaurant. So you would then still could use the building area method. You would just have the bottom floor use the office number, and then the restaurant use the restaurant numbers. So just because they use the building area method doesn't mean that it's only one. You can use multiple ones. Now, what I will tell you that when you have a structure that also contains sleeping units and dwelling units, those sleeping units and dwelling units are not to be included in this area weighted calculation. And so when you look at this on the plans or on a report that's provided, there shouldn't be anything in there for the dwelling or sleeping units, because they're addressed in a different area. So here's the table. Ooh, I got it close. 405.3.2 parentheses 1. I forgot the parentheses 1. So here are the categories. So this is not all of it, but here is some of the building types, and then how much lighting power density is allowed for that. So if we were to take a gym, right, it's going to be an exercise center. We say that it's 1,000 square feet. they are allowed. Oh, I put 2 instead of 5. Fat fingers hope. So it should be 0.072, and then you're going to multiply that by 1,000. And even though it says 750 watts that's available for that space, it would actually be 720 because you're only allowed 0.72. My apologies for my fingers not hitting it right, but that's the concept of how this would work. So on a set of plans, I should see something like this provided or documentation provided that demonstrates this concept for it. And we'll talk about that in just a moment. Now, the second option is the space by space method. Now, remember that it said that if you had unfinished space, this is the method you were going to use. And so the first thing it tells us is when you have unfinished space, the amount of watts that you get to use is a 0.1 per square foot. Now, other than if you're unfinished spaces with this, the one thing that you're going to do is basically you're going to take each type of space and multiply it by that. Instead of just kind of doing a one size fits all, you're going to go and, dive into it where it's a lot more detailed. So maybe you have an office and a conference room and a break room and a auditorium. I don't know. I'm grasping at straws here. And so then you're going to take the square footage of each of those spaces, find those spaces in the table C405.3.2 parentheses 2, and start doing the math on that one. So this one actually does a lot more math involved with it. And I'll talk about why we would do that. So in this table, you'll notice that instead of just saying, audience seating area is a 0.57, it starts breaking it down into all these different components for it, such as if we were doing performing arts where they get to utilize quite a bit of lighting for that, because we do want that, compared to a motion picture. Right? We don't need the lights for a theater to watch a movie, but we would need those lights for a theater for live performances. So here's an example. Here's a plan, right? It's obviously not everything. So we have enclosed offices, open office, and then conference meeting room. And you can see that there are different values that they get to multiply by the square footage. And so in this instance, this is something similar to what I would need to see as a plans examiner being provided to me to demonstrate, hey, ultimately, we are allowed 3,460 watts for our project. And so because of that, this is how they get there. They took 2,000 for both the enclosed and open offices, and then there was 1,000 for the conference room. And so each of these are multiplied by their appropriate lighting power density numbers. And it gives you the amount of watts, you add it up, and that's where our number is. And that's what you get to utilize for the entirety of the project, in the sense of, okay, so I have 3,460 watts. How am I going to use it? What type of lighting am I going to use to ensure that my number is less than what my maximum number here is? Now, there is some additional lighting options for it. This is why you would want to go with the space by space method. Everybody's, has asked at one point, why would you want to go through all the headache of math? If you love math, it's a great one to do, but it is additional work. But in certain instances, it really does pay off down the road, right? You could do additional lighting, and that additional lighting is for things like if you are selling merchandise. So if you're selling merchandise, you get to add these additional wattage in the merchandise area that it pertains to whatever type of goods you are selling, but it does allow you to have that that lighting in there. So sometimes, when you have a big store, there will be a lot of lighting that's involved, and they could potentially be okay because they're using this method. Now, if they go with the building area method, they are not allowed to add additional lighting. It's only if they do the space by space method. The next one is they do allow additional lighting when it comes to like highlighting art, right? Which it is good. Or, you're at the museum and you're highlighting an exhibit. They're allowing for additional lighting to be utilized in those particular areas. So here is the values that go into that to be able to calculate the additional lighting that you get for it. Now, because we're talking about plan review and trying to ensure that we get everything we need, there is a tool out there that helps us get the information, and in a rather quickly way. Okay. So we have a question. How would we address a tenant finish project that uses unfinished space converted to office, which would use more lighting than the base building calculation? Great question, Paul. So how I would address that in a tenant finish, you still are utilizing, because you're swapping out the lighting. And remember that basically, a tenant finish is the first tenant that goes into the space. And so what you're going to do is you're still going to utilize the space or the lighting power density criteria in there to determine how much lighting you would actually be able to use on that. And what you would do is you would use the values from the office, whether you're going to use the values from the office for space by space or values of the office from the building area method. So I hope that answers your question, Paul. And the good news is COMcheck does have a tool that would help you with that, because when it's an alteration, you would go in here, and instead of it being for the project type being new construction, you would place in there alteration. All right. So in a COMcheck just handles a lot of the criteria that we're asking for. And Paul, if I didn't answer your question, let me know, raise your hand, and you can verbally ask it or retype it, and we can go back and forth on that too. Okay, so COMcheck has the ability to provide all of that information on there. And a lot of times I get COMcheck that is printed into the plans themselves, which is great, because remember that the 103.2, that section we talked about of criteria on construction documents, is required to be placed on those rolled up sheets of plans. So having it there is absolutely wonderful, and it really does help. So ultimately, when we look at this is how much lighting we are allowed. So in this, they're saying it's a retail area. It has 2,100 square feet. They are allowed 1.05 watts. So when you multiply that together, you get the 2205 numbers. So 2205 is the amount of watts that you are permitted to utilize when you're designing your project. So me as a plans examiner, I look at that report, I instantly come here and it says 2205. Okay, great. Now I look to see what are you proposing your lighting plan is going to be, right? So in this particular one, it says it's still the retail area because you may be designating multiple areas, right? And it says, in there, we're using our ceiling lighting. It's the ceiling LED. We have 50 of those. The 50 fixtures, for each fixture, it's 38 watts. So when you multiply 50 by 38, you get 1900. Okay, perfect. They are saying that they're going to utilize 1900 watts. They were permitted to have 2205. And so since 1900 is less than 2205, I know as a plant examiner, okay, they've met the criteria for the interior lighting power density concept. Now, where it comes into play a lot more is I'm going to take it. I know that this doesn't show New Mexico, but it's fine. It's the same concept no matter what, but this is where the things correlated. But basically, I'm going to verify to ensure that what we have here is what we have on the plan. So if it tells me that I'm going to have ceiling LED lights and I'm going to have 50 of them, I will then go into the plans themselves and start counting. Do I have 50 of these lights? 50 of these lights. And as long as there's 50, then I'm like, it is okay. If they have 51 or they have 49, then you have to kind of take a look at it. Obviously, you want to ensure that whatever you have documented matches. And in this particular instance, the wattage is 38 watts. They were allowed 2205. They're only using 1900. If I'm already writing up review comments, I would say, hey, by the way, your interior lighting compliance certificate doesn't match the number of lights that are shown on plans, correlate the information accordingly. So that's something that I would do. But I've had plenty of times where, they're showing I'm going to have, 8 different types of lights. And once you start adding up all those additional ones, they're too close. They go over. Those will get written up every single time. All right. Now, for our interior lighting, we talked about the fact that the dwelling and sleeping units were exempt from having to do the interior lighting or being included in that interior lighting power density calculation. And that's because there is already criteria set up that states that the lighting that's involved with those dwelling units, they have to be high efficacy bulbs for 90% of it. And the high efficacy has to meet the criteria that we have right here, right? As far as the efficacy, because it did change. Now, another lighting power density concept that's included in the code is dealing with the lighting that's utilized for plant growth, right? That lighting has to be high efficacy, but high efficacy as it pertains to the planting, right? Because lumens are for humans. And so we have to use photons for plants. So the photon efficiency that's required is 1.6. Now, y'all know I have the hardest time. This is my aluminum and spaghetti that certain people have difficulty saying. It is the okay. It's joules, my apologies. I should just get a recording of somebody saying that for me so I can just push play when it comes time to it. Micro joules. All right. I try. And so that is the efficiency that you're going to want to see on the plan. So that's what should be noted on the plans when you have lighting involved for, grow facilities. And when I say grow facilities, I am referring to any type of plant that grows, right? So there's a lot of different types of plants out there. And as you can see, this one is doing lettuce and succulents, right? So we have a lot of those going on out there. Now, that was all of the interior items that I want to see on the plans. Now we have to talk about our exterior lighting. So our exterior lighting, when we are, discussing this is really thinking about the same type of concept in the sense that we are going to limit the amount of watts you can use in your design for your exterior lighting. Now, with that being said, it's set up a little bit differently than the interior, and we're going to go through that. But more importantly, there is a plethora of exceptions of types of exterior lighting that would not be included into these calculations. So here is some of the exceptions. I think the big ones that really need to be thought of, because I have seen where they get included in it, is the lighting that's provided for safety. To me, that is, at the hospital entrance, that light is always on, right? And so that probably would not need to be included in it, because that is something we want to ensure, it is always there. Exit signs. I have seen reports, COMcheck reports, that have included exit signs in there, and we don't need to have those. Anything that's dealing with directional markers, advertising signage, anything that's integral to equipment, right? Sometimes there's some exterior lighting that's included in it that's installed by the manufacturer when that piece of equipment was being put together, right? That doesn't need to be included. If you have lighting at a location that's going to be used for video, filming, live theater, things of that nature, it's not going to be included. Athletic fields, any temporary lighting does not need to be included. Theme park, amusement parks. If you have lighting again on the exterior that's going to highlight art, monuments, the national flag, none of that needs to be included. Water features, swimming pools, lighting that is going to be controlled with the dwelling and sleeping units, right? They have an exterior balcony, so you have those lights that the occupants within that dwelling and sleeping unit have the capability of turning on and off. Lighting that is required for egress by the IBC, right? None of that has to be included. And just like on the interior lighting side, we have COMcheck that can produce that, because remember, once again, we have to put on our construction plans our fixture schedule, our watts, our calculations, which COMcheck takes care of, a chunk of those requirements. So it's a wonderful tool to have. Now, how it works. If we take a look at this one, you can see that it shows right here our exterior lighting zone. That is calling out that it's going to be 2. Now, the 2 means that when we go into the table, that table says that it's predominantly a residential zone, or it's a residential neighborhood business district. It's residential-esque, right? And so it has the light zone of 2. So whatever is listed here should match what we have within the table. And this is table, it's in 405.5, but now I can't think of the table number that I want to tell you. Anyway, so the COMcheck is very similar to what we saw on the interior side. It has a list of the types of areas that the lighting is going to go into, whether maybe it's parking, maybe it's the building facade, maybe it's an eating area, maybe it's a landscaping. So those types of areas are going to be listed in the A category. each of those categories is going to tell us how many square feet pertains to it. And then it's going to have an assigned number, just like in the interior lighting, there's a exterior lighting table that says, you know, parking areas are allotted 0.04 watts per square foot, right? And so ultimately, ultimately everything gets multiplied, and then you would add up all the areas, and that lets you know how much wattage are you permitted to design your exterior lighting system to. So in this instance, they were permitted 720 watts. Now, the proposed area is saying, hey, this is what we're going to do in our parking lot area, because this project apparently was only doing parking lot. We're going to have 10 fixtures. Each of those fixtures has a wattage of 65. So when you multiply that, you have 650 watts. So the 650 watts is less than the 720 watts. And so because it's less than what you're allowed, obviously at that point, it would be okay. Now, I have had plans provided to me that didn't use an exterior or an interior COMcheck for it. They did have a table that they set up and, you know, did all that, and didn't necessarily have all the math. And I will say I spent a lot more time reviewing that one than any one that I receive a COMcheck for, because this is very, very easy, and it's quick to be able to just, you know, basically check off a huge chunk out of the energy code when it comes to lighting on it. Now, you know, some people say, well, that's kind of a little concerning, right? Is you're just going to take the word for it. And that's not the case. I verified just like I would, you know, on the interior side. If this says that I have, you know, 10 fixtures that are going in, I'm going to then look at the exterior lighting plan and count how many of these fixtures are in there to ensure that the number of fixtures matches the documentation that I have in the exterior lighting COMcheck. All right, now the next thing to think about is our controls, right? Because the reality is we got a lot of controls that are required. And so that means that I have to verify on the plans that all the controls have been placed and thought about where they need to be placed at. So we're going to comply with these sections that we see. Now, there are some exceptions, right? If a space that a control was to be utilized in this space would endanger the safety and security, then that would be exempt from it. Our stairwells, interior stairwells, exit ramps, exit passageways, any exterior lighting that would normally be off, anything that's listed within the IBC as emergency lighting, if it has wattage that is 0.02 per square foot, and it's provided with a fire alarm system, all of that is exempt from it, from the requirements of those any type of control on it. So the first control we're going to look at is our occupancy sensors. And as you can see, there's quite a few listed here that we would need to pay attention to. The big one is, I would say, is corridors. That was a new one that came into the 2021 edition of the code. And we'll talk about that here in a minute. But these are all the areas that I'm going to look on a set of plans to ensure that they demonstrate that they have an occupancy sensor. There we go. So here's an example on a set of plans, right? I happen to have a space that's 300 square feet or less, and it has to have an occupancy sensor, which it's showing. I have restrooms located here, and it's showing that it has an occupancy sensors there. And then I have private offices. These private offices also have occupancy sensors. So as you can see, this one little section of a plan demonstrates 3 different categories in this list that have to have occupancy sensors. Now, what I will say is, for the most part, other than a few of the new locations that are added, I think this section of the energy code is probably complied with fairly well, in the sense that on the plans, it's showing these occupancy sensors being demonstrated. Where we lack the information on the plans is a sequence of operations, or telling me how these sensors are going to function. So in 405.2.1.1, if you're a warehouse, you're going to go to a different section. If you're an open office, you're going into 0.3. If you are a corridor, you're going to the new section of 0.4. But otherwise, all those other occupancies, the restrooms, the 300 square feet or less, all those areas, the sensor is supposed to shut the lights off 20 minutes after everybody has left. There needs to be a manual on that allows it to turn on, but it only can go up to 50%. And then there also has to have the ability for a manual control to completely shut off. And remember, here's exceptions to that. Now, if we dive into those 3 categories that were listed within the section that occupancy sensors are required, but called out to have their special section. In this instance, it's telling us for warehouses that each aisle, right, has to be independently controlled, and has to be independently controlled from where the open areas are. So if we saw, that image, you can see that we got aisleways going quite a way, to the point of where we have a marker on the upper right-hand side that's 215. If this literally started at 1 and went up to 215 aisles, you have the 215 aisle that you're going into. Why do all the other ones need to light up? And that's kind of what they're asking for. Just to note, the electrical bureau chief reached out and was told that the portion for residential with states or other control would allow a normal switch to qualify for compliance. Wonderful. That is really good to know there. Let's see. Another question. Are facade areas measured in elevation or plan? Typically, as far as the facade goes for the lighting, I've seen it in multiple areas. Usually when it comes to the facade, there'll be an exterior lighting plan, and it will still show where the facade of it will be. I have seen on a floor plan that will have showing the designations of it out there. So I hope that answers the question. All right, so occupancy sensors for open office areas. In this particular instance, for these requirements to kick in, it says that if you have 300 square feet or less, now you're going to go back to what the original one was. Everything shuts off after 20 minutes of everybody leaving. There's a light switch or a device that allows it to come on, that you can turn on manually up to 50%, and that there is a switch that will automatically turn off. But if that space for that open office is greater than 300 square feet, now it's a little bit different as far as how the occupancy sensors are going to work. So you're going to have zones. The zone cannot be bigger than 600 square feet. It's going to turn off the lights 20 minutes after all occupants have left. Now, lighting power for control zones, I'm sorry, it also has the general lighting for that each zone. It has the ability of reducing the lighting so that it's not more than 20% of the lighting within 20 minutes of a zone being left. It kind of goes a little bit of back and forth on that. But here's an example on a set of plans that, it's true life. This is one of that I reviewed for this library. And so here's our occupancy sensor in this open office, and here are the lights that it's controlling. Then we have this one, and it's controlling all the red arrows. And then we have this one that's controlling all the purple arrows. And in this instance, I'll let you know, I stared at this set of plans forever and a day, and I'm looking all over it. And I, wrote up the comment. The engineer gave me a call, and he's like, well, I put it on the plans. He goes, I even put the little note, the little letter to show which lighting it was. And I opened it up and I'm like, oh my gosh. I said, you absolutely did. Just disregard that interview. I looked at it forever and I was trying to find it, because it was just one of those things, right? We all get, black and white blinds sometimes, where I'm sure, when you review enough plans, it all starts to blend together. Now, corridors, this is the new one. Okay, so in this particular instance, what you're going to do is after 20 minutes of nobody being in the corridor, the occupancy sensor is going to reduce it down to 50%. It does not completely shut off. That was always the big concern about it. It only reduces down to 50%. Now, the reduction, when it reduces down, it has to be done uniformly. There is an exception for it. And if the lighting is less than 2 foot candles at the darkest point, then it does not have to be reduced by the 50%, because we have our egress criteria that out of the IBC, right? We have a certain foot candle that must be maintained, and the energy code is saying, hey, we get that. But if it's got 15-foot candles, it can be reduced to 7.5, right? And that's perfectly okay. The idea is we don't want it to shut off completely, but we do want to reduce it down if nobody's in that location. All right, so here is a set of plans. This is letting me know the lighting control criteria here, right? So what I want to know is it on a time? Is it on a sensor? It's going to say S on here. S is the lights are switched. B is the lights are bi-level. D is the lights are dimmed. And then we have manual turn on 50%. The lights will automatically turn on to the 50% level. Sensors down here, automatic control provided. The sensors will automatically turn off the lights after the space has been vacated and the timeout period has expired. And then some other ones. So in this particular table, I'm going to look at what do we have for our local controls. Well, is there a local wall control? And this is saying, yes, there is a local wall control. Then it has B down here. B tells me that it's a bi-level controls, and it says note 3. So I would look at note 3. Here's where it tells me that. Then we have a manual on, and these are the options that we have. And it says M. Also says note 4. So we would come here for M, and it says the occupants must turn on the lights upon entry. The automatic control, this gives me an S that says it's on a sensor, and it would say note 5. So the sensor will automatically turn off the lights after the space has been vacated and the timeout period has expired. So this lighting control narrative from a set of plans, true life set of plans, and the notes that were associated with it lets me know that, okay, it's meeting a lot of the criteria that was listed as far as that occupancy sensor. All right, if it's not on an occupancy sensor, it does have to be on a time switch, unless you fall under one of the exceptions here. That time switch has criteria as to how it's going to function. It has to be on a schedule that's going to automatically shut off the lighting, has to have a 7-day clock, 7-day types per week, meaning, you basically set it up Monday through Sunday. Have the capability that you can incorporate holidays in there so that, nobody's going to be in this location because it's a holiday. So everything shuts off for the day. You can have backup capability. You have to have backup capability. So if the power goes out for at least 10 hours, it has the ability to maintain the scheduling when the power's been out for those 10 hours. An override switch that's a manual override switch, and that override switch can only control an area that's up to 5,000 square feet and have the ability to keep the lights on for a maximum of 2 hours. Typically, I see this in a sequence of operations or in a note on the plans. So here's an example. If we looked at wall station NW2, we look here, this was for vestibule. It says controlled via time clock. The programming is going to be 1 hour prior to business, shut off 1 hour after business is closed, and then have an override at the local wall station for 2 hours. So this sequence of operation and the wall station information does demonstrate that it meets the criteria that is shown here. Another example is here. You can see we have T1. This is time clock, automatic on 30 minutes prior to business. It shuts off 30 minutes after close. There's no other sensor on it. There's not a timeout. There is some dimming switches. There's no daylight harvesting, but there are a couple of things that we would need on that, right? The override switch information should be provided on that. This was kind of old and the override switch wasn't required at the time, but that is something to be aware of. The next one is our daylight responsive controls, right? Daylight responsive controls. Remember earlier I said all windows create a daylight zone. Daylight responsive controls are not always required. You have to meet the criteria as to whether or not your daylight zone lighting meets the wattage for it. So basically what you have, oh, sorry, a question came in. My apologies. Oh, but okay, so sorry, but which area are you measuring, the wall or the floor for the facade area? That is a great question. And when you go into COMcheck, it does kind of break it out. I would have to go back and look. Let me check on that before I answer, because I do know it's put into the code as such too. Great questions, everyone. All right, so let's see here. So daylight responsive, when we have those controls, each zone has to be independently controlled. The idea is you have so many windows and it's letting in so much light, you really don't need the artificial lights to be on because you're getting so much sunlight coming in. And so basically the sunlight comes in and you have different zones. So, 15 feet from the light is going to be in a different zone than immediately right next to the window. And maybe the one 15 feet away from the window might need the lights to be partially on, right? It's on a dim area. And so it dims a little bit of lighting on because you need a little bit additionally than you do right next to the window. And so Each of the zones are going to be, controlled independently. You're going to have the ability where it's going to have dimmability functions, where it's going to be, it could be all the way on, all the way down to 15%. It does have the ability that it can shut off all of the lights, and that you could have occupancy sensors that's going to reduce the lighting in those unoccupied areas, in addition to the daylighting controls. Now, there are a couple of exceptions here, but this is to determine how you figure out the measurements for a daylight zone. So how you figure out the depth of the daylight zone is you measure from the floor to the height of the window top. And then basically, if it was 10 feet, you would lay it down. Now, that's your primary daylight zone. You have two zones. Your secondary daylight zone is just doubling what your primary zone is. So if it was 10 feet, your first zone, your primary zone is 10 feet of depth. Your second zone is an additional 10 feet. So ultimately, you have a depth of 20 feet of daylight zones, whether it's primary or secondary. Now, to measure the width of it, it's 1/2 the foot of the height of the window. So if it's 10 feet, you're going to measure 5 feet out from each side of the window, and that is your daylight zones, your side lit daylight zones. So in that instance, you really should have individual controls in each of those zones. And you can see that on these plans, they designated where they're daylight zones, and they did a great job in this zone, this zone, this zone, and this zone. The problem is in this zone right here is they only have a single daylight responsive control shown on the plans. Now, I think they probably just forgot a layer to turn on a layer because this was the only spot, but that's why, we're part of a team. That's why I review plans, is to catch those little things so that to ensure that we have a really strong building. And so, yeah, so they did a great job. They just forgot this one zone to have it in there. Now, not only do we have top lit or daylight zones for windows, right? Side lit fenestration, we also have it when we have top light zones. Now, that would be if you're, dealing with a skylight, right? And so what you're going to do is when you have those skylights, there's a daylight zone that is produced by it. And so you have to measure. And basically, when you measure that, here's my skylight. How high is the ceiling? It's 10 feet. Great. Now I know that the ceiling is 10 feet. I'm going to multiply that by 0.7. That's 7 feet. So 7 feet all the way around the skylight is where my daylight zone is going to reside on the actual plans, that I'm going to have to figure out our controls required. Do we need to ensure that we have that? So here's an example on a set of plans. You can see there's an awful lot of skylights actually in this corridor here. And we've got a wonderful window right here. So now we have both top lit and side lit daylight zones. And in this one, you can see it's called out right here, and we call it good. All right, now there are controls for other areas too, right? It's not just, these certain ones. There is some specific application controls for that. And we're going to dive really deeply into controls next week and really deeply into daylight zones the following week. So this was just a brief overview for what I want to, see for plans. Just be aware that there are instances where things you might not think need to be involved with the energy code actually are. So things like if you are selling goods, right? Remember how you got those additional lighting allowances for it? It also includes that you have to have an occupancy sensor. You also have to have an occupancy sensor for things like display cases. So I'm sure you've been in grocery stores now that you walk down the aisle and the frozen food aisle, and the frozen foods were not lit up. The displays were not lit up, but as soon as you walked by, all the lights popped on. That is what is required here. So you would see something of that nature in the information of the actual products that are going to be in there. Lighting for plant growth and food warming. It does have some criteria there. And then for medical and dental purposes. Now, we talked about interior lighting. There's also criteria for exterior lighting. One is that your exterior lighting is shut off when there's enough daylight present. I can't tell you how many times I walk around and there's an awful lot of lights on the exterior of the building and in the dead of day. Your building facade and landscape lighting, it has to demonstrate that it shuts off 1 hour after the business is closing, and it turns on 1 hour before the opening. And then anything that doesn't fall under the building facade or landscape lighting, the two sections we just talked about, then it's going to be on a different setback, right? And so it's going to be controlled to reduce the lighting to 50% in one of the following situations, either from midnight to 6 a.m., 1 hour after closing, and then turn back on 1 hour before the opening, turn off when there's no activity present for 15 minutes. Now, when it comes to exterior parking lighting, how many of you have seen on the plans that it'll say it's 20 feet in height? The pole is 20 feet in height or 24 feet in height. And the reason for that is because the Energy Code has very specific criteria for when a pole is 24 feet or less. It then has to have the capability of reducing by 50% when there is no activity, and that the controls, you can't control more than 1,500 watts at a single time. So if we looked at a scenario such as this, we would have where it's showing, I know we're running out of time. So it gives us the information. It's demonstrating. The big one is, if you notice, it says pole mounting. It says it's going to have bi-level. The pole is at 20 feet, which does have some ideas with that. So I know we are done. And don't worry, we have more controls next week, like I said, that we'll talk about. Don't forget, we have the helpline. So if you have questions about the code, send us an email at the helpline email. We are happy to answer any questions that you might have. Yes, Vincent, I did try to put it into the chat earlier. I will try it again and see if it gets in there or not. But I will, if not, I will do my best to get it out to everyone. I do want to remind you that we have a new location of where all of the technical documents reside. So if you go to the website that for some reason is not showing here, it takes you to the page that now houses all of the technical documents. I will get that web page up to all of you. So many technical difficulties today. So excuse me. We will do that. Just remember that when you log off, don't close out, because it will pop up for a survey. I've had quite a few people just let me know that they closed out before the survey popped up. Unfortunately, I'm not able to resend it. So just be aware of that. Here's the link to where you can get the information for the technical documents so that you can get it. And then, of course, here's my contact information for that. Oh, good, Vincent. I'm glad you got that. So feel free to reach out anytime. We're always here to help you. Well, at least till the end of the year. And then thank you all for attending. Like I said, next week we are going to have lighting controls. We're going to dive really deep into those lighting controls. And then the following week we will do daylighting for that. And then the next week after that, we're going to take a look and figure out inspections for this fun section of 405. So with that, thank you, everyone. I hope you all have a fantastic day. And let me, let's see. I just want to make sure I have, excuse me. That way I can find out for you concerning the, if we're measuring the wall or the floor. I believe it's the wall, but I don't want to quote you incorrectly, but I will find out and let you know. I hope everybody has a wonderful day today.